happy to have her. This is her first time. Megan, it's a bit of a smaller group given that it's the 22nd of December, but we are very glad that you joined us. And I will tell you that we'll have discussion. The format today is also going to be a little bit different, but there's plenty of opportunity for discussion and Q&A. So you can feel free to jump in at any time. It's a very friendly group and we welcome discussion. So I want to thank all of you. I feel like this is like the real test. This is the core meeting group.
I was surprised you were doing it tonight, but I thought, well, if they can do it, I can show up.
We thought, you know, we're just going to keep it there. We're going to keep it stable and keep it regular. We didn't want to go a month without having a meeting, and they get recorded. But I know I'm amazed just for myself and also observing everyone else how the time of COVID sort of you feel constrained and on hold, but at the same time, the holidays are just as busy or as crazy as ever. So I appreciate that the time it takes to carve out to come tonight. And I really do appreciate that. I will just say for the video for YouTube, I'm Christina Studebaker, a community impact coordinator with United Way of Door County. And we're having our biweekly child care town hall meetings. And I'm going to be facilitating this meeting tonight. So, and I want to thank everyone who's been showing their support for the town hall meetings, whether you're a regular attendee or you come half the time or you've only come once. The support really matters to us and to the community, and support takes many forms during this time of COVID. Writing a letter or a note to somebody, or buying gift certificates for a local restaurant or shop, and donating time and money to churches and nonprofits. And doing this is also something that really supports the community. We've had childcare issues before COVID. We experienced some crisis during COVID. We will continue to need to pay attention to childcare after COVID. And so I look at this as really something that you're doing that helps support the community. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of you for that. So, for those who are new, we do these meetings every other week, but via Zoom, and we'll continue to do them. I have a schedule planned out that still covers the next couple months. And it's always the same Zoom link. We go through different topics to help the community understand issues. It sort of falls into 4 categories of access to childcare, affordability, quality, and supporting our workforce and attracting and keeping workforce in the area, because that's a challenge with childcare. So we normally have a guest speaker or a panel, but given the holiday week, that was a challenge. And so lucky for us, we have the internet with all sorts of great access to things. And we're talking about brain development and brain science. And it's really interesting how those of us, once you learn about it, you're like, oh yeah, and a light goes off and you say, yeah, I understand that. But it's amazing what's been learned in the past 20 or so years, and it's not yet mainstream. So we wanted to take advantage of an opportunity to, I went through and got some of what I thought were some really good videos that provide some foundational information, but yet cover a range of information about child development. And we'll play those and then also have some discussion. So if that sounds good with everyone. So I'm going to be sharing my screen during videos, but then I'll stop sharing and we can have discussion in between. And if anything goes wonky, we'll just deal the best we can with it. Good? Awesome. Okay. So the question is, will I share it? There we go.
You
So
go.
can everyone see that? You can see my screen?
Started sharing your screen and now it
Yeah.
just went to YouTube. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is this first video is really brief, but it just covers some real basics about brain development. Is it too quiet?
Yes, it
Your
is.
volume
Yes.
up.
Let's go back. The video on YouTube, how do I do should I do my volume down here?
Yeah, your volume in the bottom corner should be your control.
Now I apologize if it's crazy loud, but let's give it another go. Ready?
At birth, nearly all 100 billion neurons in the human brain.
It's still pretty quiet.
Really?
The brain only
I
grows
apologize. Is there there's a volume control within Zoom? Is that right?
There should be. Well, let's see.
It might help if everyone mutes her screen, except for you. That's what they do in this art class. So it turns off the video. So it's just you and yours. I don't know. That's what he does.
I don't know if that'll help.
Because I
No.
this volume up all the way. There was something I just discovered. I apologize for this. The other day when I was in Zoom, I probably have to be in another.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to get to those settings now, Christina.
Okay.
So everybody just turn your own volume up.
I'll take. So
Okay.
is that louder now that I've got my volume up all the way, or do you notice any difference on your side?
Exit full screen. Okay, turn my volume up. Just a minute. Boom. Okay.
You ready?
Okay. Try again. Yep.
nearly all 100 billion neurons.
Better.
It's better.
The brain only weighs about 25% of what it will later on. It's about to embark on its fastest growing period, quadrupling in size by the time a child finishes preschool. By age 6, the brain is 90% of its adult size. During that burst of growth, 700 new neural connections are formed every second as we gain the capacity to smile around 2 months, to talk usually around a year, and to dress ourselves around the age of 3. In those early years, in fact, throughout our lives, the brain changes through experience, learning to speak, taking those first steps, understanding colors and shapes, forming novel thoughts. But as certain neurons are used more frequently, other unused neurons go away. It's a process called fading. And almost anything can shape us in those baby and toddler years. First word, first ice cream, first TV show, first argument, for better or worse.
Stream 85 plus live channels with no hidden fee.
Stop that. Okay. So that just provides some foundation of how many neural connections there are and what's going on from birth. I know that was really brief, but just give people the opportunity to comment on their initial reaction to just those basics. Jane.
Yeah, well, it just, as everyone here I'm sure knows, it just validates the idea that the first 3 years of life are so important. And in fact, it actually, validates the first, 18 months are probably very, very important also. I'm sure everyone knew that already.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Good to emphasize it.
Yeah, like to think of what 100 million neural connections are is just like, we can't even fathom that. It's kind of like when you up here in Door County, when you go to the dark sky and you see the number of stars in the sky, and you're like, wow, that is just mind-blowing, and that they're connecting. And I think what I think is also interesting about that is how right away, you're building what happens makes stronger connections, and pruning is already starting, that idea of the pruning.
Mm-hmm.
Jane, you're on.
Yeah, and what I think about, and it's a personal issue, but it's personal probably to a lot of moms and dads in our county, is that when you have to work, meaning, your husband said, we're not making it. This is a real story. We're not making it. You need to go back to work when you thought you'd be able to be home with your baby for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're leaving your baby with somebody else. And that is so hard. And those are such formative months and years. And that's why it's so important we try and do something here in our county and eventually in our country to make that happen easier for parents, particularly those who must work, in order to give their children other opportunities.
Right.
Which is why a lot of people work, not because, they want to be gone from their baby.
So the next video I have builds on this idea of brain architecture. It's closer to 5 to 6 minutes long, and it builds on the connections and the pruning. And now we start to talk more about what the daily interactions that a child is having with caregivers, whether that's a child care provider, parent, anyone that they're interacting with, how those interactions are influencing brain development. So we'll see if I can do this again. Okay, so you see that. I want to get rid of this and come to this one. Okay.
Our brains allow us to perceive and interact with the world around us. This 3-pound mass of tissue contains nearly 40 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses or connections, sending information to the rest of our body at a rate of nearly 500 messages per second. Science tells us that early brain development affects the course of our later lives. Years of accumulated research on how the brain develops and functions now informs best practices in the nurturing of children. But there remains a disconnect between this science and what is practiced in communities. The gap between knowledge and practice has huge consequences for society.
If we look at the cost of healthcare, the achievement gap, look at crime, the problems that we face in society today, science tells us that we actually know the root of these problems. Many of these problems actually go back to early childhood. I get a lot of referrals from school for behavioral problems. A lot of times teachers refer kids due to acting out behaviors, attentional problems, learning problems. Although we call them school-related behaviors, lots of times they've developed years and years before. They just start showing when children enter school. We all know that some children get to school more capable of learning than others, and that how they arrive at school will influence how they do for the rest of their academic careers. So one way to think about the development of brain architecture in early childhood is it's a lot like building a house.
And as when building a house, the developing brain requires a sturdy foundation. Proper brain foundation needs responsive and nurturing adults.
Our brains definitely need stimulation to be able to wire the brain up correctly. Left in a crib, a child cannot provide the stimulation its brain needs to form a healthy and solid brain architecture.
Responsive parenting is key to a process called pruning. Pruning is how the brain creates the most efficient pathways possible. During the first year of life, there are periods of growth where nearly 700 synapses are formed a second, creating connections for language, hearing, vision, and movement. However, not all these connections are needed or are efficient. Pruning back the pathways that are rarely used allows the brain to send signals more quickly. These pathways are the foundation for later learning, forming our brain architecture. Babies' brains grow by building themselves from the bottom up.
So you're sculpting the brain by the information that the brain is processing.
By the age of 2, our brains have already made some giant developmental leaps. Regions of the brain that control vision and hearing have already developed. Areas that handle language and communication skills, which are heavily dependent upon interaction with adults, are rapidly developing. And the part of our brain that deals with higher order reasoning and cognitive functions is at its crucial beginning phase of development. Sadly, many children do not receive the attention they need to form healthy brain architecture.
By age 2, we can already predict third grade reading scores. So many of the things that we think are happening later in life are actually at their beginnings in early childhood and infancy.
The ability to predict third grade reading skills at age 2 has to do with understanding brain architecture. The part of the brain that controls language and communication has its largest growth spurt during a child's first 4 years. Without a responsive adult at this age, the pruning process begins to disconnect underused pathways. This leads to language and reading difficulties later.
The brain doesn't work in pieces. It works as a coherent whole. So if the foundation isn't set well, it sends poor information to those higher centers. And what starts looking like a problem in this part of the brain ends up being a problem in attention regulation and in higher order cognition. So brain architecture is not set by 2 years of age. There's still a lot happening. But what happens early influences what happens later. Skill begets skill.
Research shows that children who have had positive adult interaction, adequate nutrition, and minimal exposure to stress arrive at school better able to learn than those who have grown up with those factors. What adults can do to help a child's developing brain reach its full potential will be covered in the video Serve and Return.
Okay, so there was some more information about the brain development. What are reactions to that?
Well, I think when my boys were growing up, not that we didn't know that stuff. Clearly, we know more and more and more about brain behavior than we used to have and used to know. It makes me wonder. I don't want to get into the whole thing about my concerns about what happens when something interrupts. You know, that like in the cases of autism, regressives that come in. So it just, I don't know, just. I watch that and I think that this is important information, but I also worry about people who to watch that whose children aren't progressing when they watch something like that. It could make parents, not that they shouldn't watch it, but it rings some bells in me about how that could be very hard for some people to watch that video we just watched. Because if your child wasn't advancing or regressing, then you start to wonder, what did I do, you know?
Yep, there's general milestones, but they're just sort of averages, and even under the course of what you might term regular development, there's great variability. And then there's also other conditions that kids can experience which impact their development. Right. And so you don't want to make it seem like there's a right and a wrong way for
Right.
a particular child, right?
Right. That's, yeah. I mean, it just, you asked, what is your impression when you saw that? And that is what was going through my mind as I'm watching it. You know, I do know, I've mentioned this in other meetings that I was home with my boys and they went to preschool, but just a couple mornings a week, just so they'll be around other kids. That was the kind of life I had. But even though I'm the oldest of 7 children, I noticed with my second son that it just occurred to me that I would talk to him in paragraphs and he would understand when he was like 2.5 years old. And so then so I did pick up then that, you know, there's really not too much you can tell them or expose them to. They're always absorbing, and they're absorbing so much more than you realize at the time, you know.
Yeah. Jane?
I picked up on the statement about minimal exposure to stress is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, my children, the older one, because of this whole issue of accessibility to daycare and, you know, losing a childcare worker and finding another one. And we had a session on that a few weeks back, a couple months back. Went from place to place for a little while. And then they were in a daycare center, a childcare center, kinder care, eventually. And so it wasn't that he didn't have exposure to other children or to activities or to attention from teachers and adults. But I'm wondering about that idea of stress in the first 3 years, depending on the child, because they're also different. And some are going to be more sensitive than others to this idea of, well, now I'm here and now I'm there and I'm not with mom or I'm not with dad or whatever. And I don't know what you do about that. Exactly. But it'd be interesting to have some research on what people, what professionals have found in terms of the stress to children related to, in those first 3 years, related to not being with their parents. Because I don't really know a lot about that.
That's an excellent point.
Because I would have.
There is a lot of research on that. It's the term it's given is separation anxiety, and it starts to kick in at a particular age. I want to say
18 months.
10 months-ish, you know. It's almost like so maybe you notice this if a child comes to your house and has a grandchild with them and they're ready to hand them to you and the kid instantly starts to cry. That's a signal that they're at the point of separation anxiety. And again, just as Christina mentioned, there's a range for all things developmentally. Some kids, you know, separation anxiety may be a 2-day phase.
Right.
For some kids, it goes on for a much longer time. And so in a caregiving setting, that's just one of the things that, you know I needed to be mindful of constantly, you know, checking with your coworkers and saying, you know, who's got Sarah at arrival today? Because Sarah needs help.
Okay.
So it's in a caregiving setting, in a formal caregiving setting, it's on the to-do list and be mindful list, just like who needs toileting at what time, who fumbles with their buttons. It's quite intentional to pay attention to it.
Yeah, we don't have anyone, well, Jane is with Northern Door Children's Center, but we've had Cindy Trinkner Pia and Alexis Fuller from 2 of our licensed group centers in the county on with us in earlier meetings. And one of the things that they mention is that they have individualized lesson plans for the kids.
Right.
And so this idea of
No.
the education, when we refer to high quality child care, we have affordable, high quality child care that's accessible as sort of this big picture goal. And to break that down, these videos, I think, help us understand that high quality component a little bit better, so that even if you were home and you were taking care of your child, if you knew about these things, you might do some things that you didn't do otherwise. You're not necessarily doing harm to your child, but it's just what we know. Like, as we learn things about nutrition, we change what we feed our kids. As we learn things about brain science and brain development, we can take more intention in what we are doing. We're in a webinar on a completely different topic about diversity for United Way, but one of the sayings I'm having a wall plaque made of it by my niece, but it says, when you know better, you have the opportunity to do better. So it's like, when you don't know better, we're all doing the best we can, but as you learn something, you have the opportunity to change and do better. So we're not judging anyone. It's just, as we learn this information, we take it into account.
So,
yep.
So that's, no, I'm not. So that's why I keep having this thing in my head about, that Christina has mentioned. We have a lot of, well, we don't really know the number of home childcare workers who, if we could get them together as a network and offer them these sorts of informational seminars, and just parents through the Children's and Families. Sorry, Amy, I don't know the official Partnership for Children's and Families.
We got a lot of programs with a lot of
So,
names.
it would have been great if I had some of that information and been able to, at least try to work with that at the time. It would help parents feel better. It would help childcare workers feel better too.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great idea.
And this stuff really starts to connect now with other things that we've heard. We had I think it was our second childcare town hall meeting. We had Carly Martins, school counselor with Sturgeon Bay Elementary. And she was talking about trauma. And we talk about, what is it, trauma-induced care? Is that the term?
Informed.
Trauma-informed, not trauma-induced. I'm like, you shouldn't induce trauma. That seems wrong. But so trauma-informed care. And she said, that also that word trauma is that you have to unpackage that. There's, what do you mean by that? And she said, it can just be daily stresses, and it can be a big event, or it can be raised level of normal, of a baseline of stress in a kid's life, which is impacting what their environment is like, which impacts their brain development. And then when they get to elementary, what they're seeing, which is what they touched on in this video that we just saw, that you think, because it's just how we are built to process information, we think when we see it, something just caused that. And I think what this brain science research helps us understand is going back, thinking about, oh, wait a minute, this wasn't even a month ago or 6 months ago. We're talking something that started getting programmed when they were a year old, 2 years old. So that's also what we're trying to address. We know that there's an increasing stress on schools for things like sharing and behavior control, those social skills, and understanding that as part of what we're trying to address earlier on with our child care, however it's delivered. So any more comments on that, or we want to go to the next video? Good. So we are queuing up. We're going on to the next video that they were getting ready to queue up, talking about serve and return. So I will bring that up. Thank you all for your patience with this wonky interaction. Oh, let me set my volume
More and more of our children are growing up under conditions where their brain architecture is threatened by the experiences they are having or the experiences that they are not getting.
The first 4 years of a child's life are crucial to her later development. It's during those years that the brain has its largest period of growth in the areas of hearing, vision, language, and communication. However, many children are not getting the basic care required to support this phase of their development.
Especially in these times, parents get busy. It's easy to plop a child in front of the television set. Parents need to be very aware that engagement is one of the most important things that they can do for their child.
What's missing for many young children is something called serve and return.
Would you like to smell too?
Serve and return describes the fundamental adult-child interactions which help a baby reach her full potential. Serve and return is something as basic as playing peekaboo. Or adults talking to an infant as they go about their daily routine.
Babies are actually learning words. They're forming language. The part of their brain that is able to produce language is working long before the first word is heard. It's simple things like getting on the floor and playing with kids, looking into their eyes when you're speaking to them, reading to them, singing to them. What that interaction does is it provides a solid framework for kids.
Serve and return doesn't always mean verbal interaction between an adult and child, especially in infancy. It could occur during feeding or bathing. As long as the adult is responsive, the child's brain is getting the stimulation it needs to develop.
So the brain will formulate an idea. I'm going to smile. And smile, and someone responds to that smile, and the very process of organizing that smile now gets confirmed with a positive feedback. And that confirms those neurons. Says, oh, you sent a good signal. This is a pathway we're going to keep.
Research shows that a child surrounded by caring and responsive adults will start elementary school with better social skills, better emotional regulation, and a better ability to focus than a child lacking in positive adult attention. While it may not be readily apparent, children in infancy are developing the parts of the brain that are crucial to their later social and academic lives. Moreover, science shows that it's easier and more effective to strengthen these pathways while still developing, rather than to try and rebuild them later.
So the question is, if you want your child to be a good reader, when do you start putting effort into that? Well, you start at birth with serve and return and communication, because really reading, writing, it's all communication. It's about communicating information.
A lack of serve and return is one of the causes of the education gap seen in society today.
The most common form of maltreatment is that babies are neglected and young children experience neglect of their basic needs. The absence of stimulation, the lack of sufficient serve and return means that I can't confirm much and more than should gets carried away.
Without healthy brain architecture, children are at risk of falling behind and never catching up. Asking elementary schools to fix problems that are rooted in infancy sets schools up to fail and is not the best way to use resources. It's imperative that communities come together to provide at-risk families with educational and financial support to make a difference in the lives of infants and preschoolers. Strong communities create strong brain architecture.
I often talk to parents about building scaffolding for their children as they develop. And when we build scaffolding, it's not just the family that's building it, but it's the entire neighborhood and the community. There are a lot of people in children's lives who helped develop that healthy brain architecture by being a part of that serve and return, where the child's brain is being able to think about important and wonderful things.
So any thoughts on that video?
Oh, go ahead, Rosemary.
Well, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here, but all I can think of when I'm watching that is if it's hard enough for young parents to, to spend that kind of time with their children under normal circumstances, and even, in the best daycare situation, and all this, but now with COVID, it just makes you wonder, what's going to happen, when you have parents at home, and it's just so strained as a society. All societies are going to be so strained, and we're going to find out years from now what happened with this, because you can see, I picture all these young parents trying to teach their children or be with their children while they're working. How can you possibly do that? And so the child is put in front of the TV, right? What else are you going to do? You got to work. So
one of the things that our Partnership for Children and Families has been doing pre-COVID was something called block parties, and not like a party like we think of in the neighborhood block party, but actually they have purchased thousands of dollars worth of different blocks that are age appropriate, and helping parents learn how to get down on the floor, play with their kids, because for some it's not natural.
Right.
And so sometimes it might be, we do the best we can as parents. Ann Schmakel from Sturgeon Bay Schools always says, we meet them where we're at. And we know that everybody is being the best parent they can be. We don't know the circumstances. So sometimes it is, teaching parents that it's okay to get down on the ground and play with blocks and be goofy and allow that creativity. To be a kid themselves, because some of them maybe didn't get that opportunity to be a kid. And, we even have been doing some of those at the ADRC where grandparents, Corey McFarland, who's been on these calls a few times, Corey brings her grandkids once in a while. And, it's not for her necessarily in that case, but there's some intergenerational activity where the seniors in our community who don't have access to their grandkids on a regular basis. And they love it. There are these two ladies who just are like, oh my God, I haven't played in forever and blah, blah, blah. I think this is my mother. Many of you know, my mother has no grandchildren. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to get her to a senior center where they do intergenerational activity. Because she would thrive, the kiddos would thrive, and the parents who are bringing their kids to see some positive play modeling. And Rosemary, I think those are the things we're going to have to think about differently after COVID. Because we're making some back tracks, we're making some forward tracks, but in areas we are losing things. And thinking about different ways to model and just to say, hey, it's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. You did truly the best you could during this pandemic. And we know that there's going to be a lot of kids at school who are going to come back a little behind. And that's one of the things our team has been talking about, are what are those different things we're going to need for families and teachers to support the academic success of our kids.
As a community, there's just going to be, the need is going to be even greater than ever before, I think, because of the aftermath, when the smoke clears and we see what's happened.
Yeah, and some of it we'll see immediately and some we'll see in a few
Some
years.
we won't. Yeah.
Jane, I saw your hand.
Oh, it's just a small comment about,
she mentioned not plunking the children down in front of a television. But I think, again, this is a small item of information that could eventually be passed on to home caregivers and parents, I think there are appropriate opportunities for television. And I wish they would bring back Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, because that, to me, that is a type of serve and return.
Absolutely.
You're not there with the person, but it does give the child that opportunity, especially when the television show is pausing, talking out to the audience and gives, because I do totally, Rosemary, understand if you're a working parent and you have to get a meal on the table or, a bathroom cleaned or whatever it might be, it's okay to put them in front of the television if it's appropriate. And I think if libraries can have videos of those old shows, I don't know what's available, but videos of those old shows that parents can take out of the library. Some people.
Oh, I'm sure they do, because my niece that's autistic, they're at and she's in her 20s now. She still goes to the library all the time to get her Elmo tapes.
Yeah, again, we're talking about this idea of being able to network with parents and caregivers so that they have the best information that we can give them.
But Sesame Street's still on, isn't it?
It may be.
Yeah.
I haven't had to look lately. My grandkids are 7, 9, and 11 now. So.
And I think, and I'll comment again on this idea of then thinking about high quality childcare and what it looks like. I think when you see these videos and you understand what it takes, then you understand that early childhood education is not babysitting, truly is education, and it is labor intensive. It takes a lot of attention, and for the young children, some people think, well, the young children, you can have less attention because they don't need so much. You can let them sit there and they're not going to harm themselves, and the ones who are mobile are dangerous. There's that aspect to it, but when it comes to the brain development, this research and what they have learned helps us understand the importance of that interaction, the responsive, whether it's verbal or not, that responsive interaction with the adults, and then understanding that if that's what's necessary, then it, how everything links up, how then that links up with your child, their workforce, how that links up with your pay, and just then an appreciation of that. And so I think one of our, my personal challenges in my position here is to come up with a plan to get this information out to the more general community, because it is the foundation of understanding how everything links up and goes from here when you think about the child care system.
Yeah, so important. Yeah, the community education part of it. Yeah. Christina. Yeah.
And Missy and Margie, you're off mute. Were you going to say something?
No, I'm listening to this and just because I'm as an educator, I'm always thinking about how do you and so this notion, I don't know that the word architecture is one that would draw people in, but the foundation of a house, and scaffolding has meaning in house building or construction, and scaffolding has meaning in education.
Right.
A lot of terms in education that lend themselves to the metaphor of architecture or building. And I was struck by the phrase, I don't know if you're the one who said it, Christina, or if it's been a long day. I was in the Kimberly schools all day. I don't know if you said it or if it was on the video that strong communities build healthy brain architecture. I don't know, like the word architecture, but strong communities building,
Mhm.
a metaphor of constructing something
Mhm.
that includes a future of really well-prepared, capable kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've started doing messaging around that brain building piece and
Mhm.
the gifts that were given to our childcare center workers. We're thanking them for being those brain builders,
Mhm.
reinforcing the value of their job. And,
Mhm.
I haven't posted a brain builder post lately on Facebook, but, we try to reinforce that message because one, it talks about the value of the education, but then also it leads to that workforce piece. So when we
Mhm.
talk about brain building, we can really hit a lot of aspects of our childcare
Mhm.
message. And Christina, that's gonna look great on the video. And you can even leave it in me going, this looks great. It's a
And
long
then
day.
we got to the funky dancing part of the town hall meeting. So the next videos I have queued up, then we are progressing more and more in terms of development. So this next one starts to talk more about executive function. And so we'll see. So many controls to make sure I've got in order. Yeah.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce. Look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? A toolbox. A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggle. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on, lots of runways, and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves. If you don't have self-regulation, you act down and the teacher puts you in timeout and says, then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7 and plus 4. In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated. The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years. It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together. Just take notes. Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
Mom, you're at 24. Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things. They're unafraid. I got hit by my dog in my arm. Oh, yeah. If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society. You're okay.
Those kids made me smile.
I know, I love these videos. I'm like, if you can look at these kids' faces with their big eyes and they're taking it all in, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're learning all the time.
It's so true. I was sitting there, so funny you said that, Amy, because I was sitting there thinking, like, I'm really liking watching all these videos of these little kids. I never see little kids, They're so cute.
Christina likes to watch puppies. I like to watch kids.
I like to watch both.
But this does, I mean, these videos, it's interesting. I was wanting to do this sort of session early on as the foundation, but I think it's also interesting now to hear these videos and be able to relate to things that we've already heard from other presenters talking about.
I agree.
Workforce issues, and it isn't so much in the town hall meeting with workforce, but when I was at Economic Development Corporation before coming to United Way and talking with employers, because at that time was pre-COVID, unemployment was down below 4%. It was such a challenge to get workers, right? If people described, and Missy can talk about this, employing unemployable is a phrase that you would hear a lot. So you've got people who didn't have a job, or they don't have a job for a reason. They've had jobs and they've lost jobs, and you are trying to employ those people, and it's like showing up on time, following the rules, those sorts of things. It all relates to this sort of stuff.
Very much like childcare as you describe it.
Right. But if they don't learn it when they're kids, sometimes they never do. I mean, we know adults like that, or know of adults like that never quite can figure it out, Never on time, never know when they're supposed to be, don't value those things, and it's a problem.
Yeah. Our HR folks usually call them soft skills, and they'll say, can you teach them this? Before they graduate high school, is this something you can instill in them? But as we're learning from this video, it starts right away. And then continues to be reinforced. So if we have a strong beginning, whatever that beginning looks like, but if it's strong, we can focus on this executive function. And in raising a thinking child, no small matters. Sorry, wrong program, wrong title. But in No Small Matters, that was kind of the military piece of the video, was talking about, why the military base that was highlighted, they focus so much on childcare because they see that it starts those early patterns and early.
Right. Yeah.
Jane, you're on mute.
So this reminds me, though, that ACEs, and I'm trying to remember, that stands
childhood
experiences. Yes, must impact this process. Yes, of learning how to adjust related to unpredictable situations, how to make those connections, how to avoid distraction. Because I think you can have parents who are trying to do their best and providing the education or the opportunities, but if there are those adverse childhood experiences going on at the same time, maybe Margie can answer this, that probably has a strong impact negatively on establishing this executive function.
Yeah. As you've been making observations like that, Jane, I keep thinking of my time when I was working in a Head Start program in inner city Detroit.
Right.
And there was the classroom time with the kids. There was more time spent on home visits and parent education because they didn't know what they didn't know.
Right.
And so just being with them and seeing how they interacted, given whatever it is they were doing the best they knew how to do. So when I had a chance to see them respond to something that may have happened 10 times a day with their 13-month-old, or whatever kids were in the house, not just the ones that were in Head Start. And it gave me a chance to say, I could look at them and say, how about, here's one way that you might want to try it the next time. And I might look at Carlos and say, Carlos, blah, blah, blah. And 99 times out of 100, if you've done a little bit of a rapport establishing, they were over the moon grateful versus feeling that they were not good enough, and you get a little bit of that started, and then they start pulling on you. And they're dropping off Carlos, they'll say, hey, can I ask you a quick question? It's like, yes.
Well, and the important thing is that's then breaking the cycle, because if they don't have the information, then the child grows up with that same non-information that the parent had, and that's the way they parent their children, and so on and so forth. Again, speaking from experience, very important to have these skills.
Yeah.
Right. And to that point, Margie, I was doing some tutoring in Chicago for a couple of years, volunteer tutoring with kids from at-risk homes and all that, but the parents got them there for this volunteer tutoring. And my experience was the parents were so grateful and so open, and so if you just tell them all the time, you're doing a great job, because they got their kids, they're in between their second and third jobs, they got their kids to the West Side for tutoring. And just if you remind them they're doing a great job, and that they are doing the best they can, and you could try this or what, then they are so open. and so grateful. They want to learn, and
Yeah.
it's the easiest part of the job. So easy, makes everything so much happier to deal with it like that, to see how much the parents want to learn,
Yeah, I think, and I tried to put together these videos in a way that helps us see the progression of childcare within the childcare itself, but then also the broader impact on the community, because that is when we talk about the workforce and people say, but wow, so a business is going to support childcare in the community today and see a return on their investment 15, 20 years from now, like that's really difficult buy-in to get. Whereas I think you can see here through these videos, and there are lots of them online, but I just pulled a handful that I thought captured the essence of this, that I think you get an impact immediately. And then the thing is that it just keeps building and building and spreading and spreading. And so then the ultimate return on your investment at the community level is large. And so once again, that's a challenge for us and me specifically to be thinking about how to communicate this to the community, because it's community buy-in.
Right.
So making that connection that help people understand what it means for the community. And so anything they can do money-wise, just attention-wise, learning, so that we're all more mindful of this, the impact that can have. And so this, I know we're already a little bit past 7 o'clock, but the last video I have is just about 3.5 minutes and takes us to this sort of long-term return on investment aspect. So if anyone has to leave, I completely understand. This will be on YouTube later, but if you can hang in. Okay, make that go small. There we go. No, go ahead.
The question is, can we do anything early in life that would shift the odds for children? Do we have any evidence that what we do works? We do.
After years of accumulated research, the science on brain development is clear. To create the largest change, all signs point back to the child's earliest years.
So we know from the neuroscience literature, from the literature on intervention with early childhood education, that if you provide an at-risk family, a poverty family, with the kind of tools and environment that middle and upper middle class families have, you can have a high return. So the question is, so we know that in the research, we know the brain development starts right at the beginning, and it's critical to provide this environment as early as you can. What sort of real world policy can make this happen? Not just for a small group of kids, but something you could replicate and bring to scale.
Many of these studies have now been subjected to economic analyses. The Nobel Prize winning economists have come in and looked at what the costs of those programs and then what happens.
Economists like Art Rolnick have found that model programs offer a return between $7 to $16 for every $1 invested, depending on the program. And early childhood intervention programs are less expensive and more effective in addressing learning problems later in elementary and high school.
The good programs cost a lot because you need well-trained people, good curriculum, and so on. But if you follow the kids up, you are able to look at, well, what did it save us in terms of special education, which is expensive? What did it save us in terms of the kids dropping out of school and making less money and so paying less taxes? What did it cost us in terms of crime and incarceration?
Infants provided with proper nutrition and nurture grow into self-sufficient adults. Those adults, in turn, are far more likely to become successful parents who can provide for their families, engage their children in serve and return, and foster an environment free of toxic stress. early childhood education doesn't just benefit that child. So there's a community benefit for all our kids, or in a better education environment, and for society with much lower crime and much more successful. It's a challenge during these difficult economic times to look several generations ahead. However, it's over the long haul that early childhood programs accrue benefits.
They're cost effective. We recoup that cost over many, many years, which is one of the challenges always. We are an immediate gratification society, but they're cost effective, and they tell us over and over, you either pay now or you're going to pay more later.
Yep, that's it. That's it.
Rosemary and Jean, that's the conversation we have with community investment. You know, every one of those meetings, that's what we talk about. And Grace always says it, if we're saving one life, if we're preventing one child from, and yeah, it's, you know, that data and getting people to understand it, and how then, as Jane said earlier, the generational piece of it, how we make those.
It multiplies.
It multiplies. Mm-hmm.
Because not only as a parent will, excuse me, not only as a parent, if they become a parent, will that child be passing on better experiences, but as a friend, as a relative, as a neighbor, you know, it's like fingers spreading out. There's a
right. Yeah.
Christina, that's a really nice progression of teaching that you took in 3 to 5 minute increments.
Yeah, this.
Nice job.
I agree.
This was a really good session.
This was a great session. Really was. Really was.
Thank you. I mean, it follows the arc of the movie No Small Matter. And that's 75 minutes. And so this is about 20 minutes of video, which allows us to have discussion in between. But you know, that YouTube, that's a good invention, man.
Well, you know what, but I agree, the organization of the session is great. I hope that people watch it on YouTube after the holidays, that they really see what this, because this was really a great program. And just a couple of days before Christmas. So God bless you, honey, that you did this.
So Christina, I don't know if you've been, have you advertised that these are available for people to view on YouTube, these sessions? Okay, have you put it on
Facebook and I just missed it? Maybe.
I haven't put anything on a month on Facebook because I'm behind on the last one. So sometime in the next week.
Some good reasons, so
the next week.
Sometime in the next week, you'll get both of them up there.
But this one particularly,
week, 2 weeks away is fine.
No, the further behind I get, the further everyone else gets. So,
that's true.
But we, and Christina and I both put the links then usually in emails that we send to certain people and things like that. Folks, if they missed it, they can find it there.
Great.
But as Rosemary said, I think if this one after the holidays gets put in however many places, so people will pay attention to it and maybe go watch it. Yeah.
Has there been an article in the Peninsula Pulse about this program? Just curious about this series that you're running, these town halls.
I don't know.
They put it in, they announced that these are happening now, but as a featured article, no. And so that's part of working on outreach, and I've got my small committee, 2 of the members here participating. That there's so much to do, and COVID makes it that much more difficult, you know. Even though we've got on our target to connect with Josh Van Lieshout and or Mayor Ward to come and talk about the link to the the economic plan for the city to bring in some males, some perspective. Had Miles as a member of the parent panel that one night, but and I've got community surveys that I'm analyzing now.
Pardon me.
The challenge is, for lack of a better term, the hook or the stickiness. So people drop in and they will pay attention, they find it interesting, but it's not perceived as necessarily crisis mode or, so we understand that it is a long-term issue that needs attention so that we don't get to crisis mode. We don't want to be where we were in July. And that there's more than just the group centers, that there are these in-home providers understanding the network through the community surveys. I do still understand that there are many people who struggle and they need more affordable options. There need to be different options in the county to not have people so stressed out about this all the time.
Right.
And so finding that path or just having the resources to put in more time to always have the message out, it's a challenge.
Oh, I can believe it. It's really good stuff. And I just would like more people to learn, because they have to understand you're not just talking about where am I going to drop my kids off so I can go to work. This is, like you're saying, it's investing in our children and our community. Community health, and employers need to look at it. It's not just who's going to take the kids so their employee can come to work. You know, it's much more important than that.
Yeah, on the one hand, I mean, it's just like you can find any topic and bring it back to childcare. So you can talk about economic development, stability, talk about quality of life. You can talk about kids' brain development. You could talk about saving money at the schools. And so there's all these levels. And on the one hand, you think, well, okay, just talk about all those things and you should be able to focus on people. But then it's just like, it's really scattered. And so Margie and Annika can attest to the challenges we have faced in terms of getting that. So any thoughts or anyone you encounter who you think would be a great contribution to get involved, we welcome them.
Okay.
Yellow man.